Time now to continue our road to the Open Series. We go back to 1977. I know you want to talk about a couple, maybe at least one Australian Open a few years before 77, Clays, but don't let us get too sidetracked because we're going to celebrate the victory of David Graham back at the Australian back in 77, and one of the greatest players ever to come out of this nation has been good enough to join us on Inside the Ropes. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Nice to be with you.
It's great to have you with us. It really is. And we're looking forward to spending some time having a chat to you about this and a few other things, obviously. Okay. 77's a long time ago, Dave. When we ask you to kind of reflect to that year and what the Australian Open played out for you and what it meant to you, how vivid are those memories?
Well, they're actually still very vivid because I was fortunate to come back for their 100th year celebration, and I've been a member at the Australian Golf Club for many, many years, and it was really nice to receive their wonderful hospitality and everything. And it was also, great because I think it was either the first or the second year after Jack Nicklaus had redone the Australian that I'd won, and it was obviously financed in those days by the late, great Kerry Packer. So he resurrected the Australian Open, and the year that I particularly won had a wonderful field, and it was really a launching pad for the Open Championship to get back into world acclaim.
How important was Kerry Packer at that time, David? I mean, we sort of gloss over him in golfing terms, but everyone sort of links his name with cricket. But he did so much for Australian golf at that time, didn't he? What was your personal relationship with him?
Well, I didn't know him all that well. I spent quite a bit of time with him when he was getting tutored by the great Norman von Nider, and obviously he had brought Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and Gary Player and a very large world-class field to play in the Open and kind of resurrected it a little bit. And he put a lot of money into the tournament, and he put a lot of money into the Australian Golf Club, and he converted the Australian from an old kind of linksy style design, which was, shallow bunkers and very benign greens and everything. He brought Jack Nicklaus in and made the Australian Golf Club, one of the great courses in the world. And so his contribution to golf was really incredible.
Did you see him around the Open when you were playing, through that period, David?
Oh, absolutely. He was out there all the time. The week before the Open, he would take Jack Nicklaus up to the Great Barrier Reef, and they would go marlin fishing, and then a lot of players would stay at his house. And a lot of the golfers in those days were fond of playing tennis, so they would play tennis, and he was a great host. He was wonderful. He brought the world's best to play in the Australian Open. We were very fortunate.
We spoke to Bob Shearer about him a couple of weeks ago on the show as part of this series, and Bob remembered going to Kerry's home and pictures of wild animals devouring other less capable animals in the wild. Did you ever did big paintings and photos all over? Did you ever go to Kerry's house, and can you validate?
Sure I did. I lots of times, yes.
Can you remember paintings and pictures like that strewn all over the place?
Kerry had anything that he wanted. Kerry had. He had a massive big house, and he had whatever he wanted, and television sets everywhere, and he was great. Food always on the buffet table and everything. Yeah, he was remarkable, and he had that one little room where he would go and sit in his great big leather chair and watch television. And he was a character. But his country, the one thing that I remember very vividly was that I think maybe Jack or Arnold had complained about the practice balls, range balls on the practice fairway at the Open there at the Australian, and so about the next day. He brought in, I don't know how many thousands of dozens of Dunlop 65 golf balls and opened up buckets full of brand new balls. And by about Friday night or Saturday morning, there was none of them left. All the caddies and all the players had stuffed their bags with all these new balls.
Magnificent.
Yeah, it was. I'm sure that a lot of people remember that. Yeah.
So, David, on just the field, you referred to the field. I mean, this is the one you conquered, and we'll talk to you more about how you did it in a second. But aside from all the great Australian names, we're looking at, Palmer, Nicholas, Charles,
Litsky, January.
Litsky, January. We've got Ray Floyd. I can see on the list down here a B. Jones, but I don't think that was Bobby at that time.
Brian Jones.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
But and a really good,
missed the cut,
and a really fantastic player called Mark Hayes too. I just want to get that on the record.
No, Hubert Green was there, and it was amazing.
It's an extraordinary field, isn't it?
It was, and he paid for it. He made it all possible, and Qantas were, I think, the sponsors, and they gave us airline tickets, and Mr. Packer helped us with our hotel bills, and he wanted the Australian Open to be the best it could be, and in his time, he did exactly that. And if you think, and I've often said this in some of my speeches around the country, that if you think about Nicholas, Palmer, and Player as the big three in golf, and you think that Jack Nicklaus won 6 Australian Opens, and Gary Player won 7 Australian Opens, and Mr. Palmer won 1, and you think about doing that in the late 60s and the early 70s, that was a heck of an effort to fly from South Africa or Florida, where Jack lived, to come to Australia and let young aspiring players like myself have a chance to see what world-class golfers were. And it was very important to the future of Australian golf that their contribution allowed young guys to look and learn, and that's what it was. It was quite remarkable for that period of time.
David, something close to your heart related to those players was the fact that I always thought was amazing, and I'm sure you did too, was that they would come down here and pick up a set of clubs from Slazenger's and a small ball and still win.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I remember playing a practice round with Jack Nicklaus at Royal Hobart the year he won there quite convincingly, and I forget which hole it was. It was maybe number 12 or 13. It was a dog leg to the right, and the caddy said, Mr. Nicklaus just hit a 2-iron down there, and you'll have a wedge to the green. And Jack said, well, where is the green? And the caddy said, it's up over the trees to the right. And Jack said, well, how far is it? He said, well, Mr. Nicklaus, it's 320-something yards. And Jack said, well, let me hit it up over the trees. And, of course, I hit it down the fairway and had a wedge, and we walked around the corner. And, there was a ball on the green about 20 feet from the hole, and obviously it was Nicklaus's ball. And, it was quite remarkable that they would change clubs, not the putter, and usually not the driver or the 3-wood, but they certainly would change irons. I mean, I think Gary changed irons every year he came. So did Jack. Yeah, it was quite remarkable.
Why did that happen, Dave?
The ability to do that.
Why did that happen?
Well, they had contracts. Jack had a contract with McGregor in America, and then he had a Dunlop Slazenger contract in England and a Dunlop contract in Australia, as did like Gary Player and that. So they would come down there and represent that club manufacturing company and play their equipment. So it was quite a profitable thing for them to do, but it was amazing that they could change clubs like that.
We might have to tell McIlroy to suck it up, Andy.
Yeah. Imagine a modern-day player. David Clates, can you imagine a modern-day player doing that?
It would never happen now.
Well, I don't think they have the ability to adjust that quickly because they have so many variables with the metal heads and the changeable shafts and everything. The older players had, I think, more repeatable swings. They didn't rely on the equipment because it wasn't very sophisticated compared to today. So they made adjustments where the younger players don't have to make adjustments. The younger players can get the clubs to adjust to them rather than the player adjusting to the clubs. So the whole scenario of availability for equipment is completely different.
Now, David, speaking of adjusting to clubs, we were talking with Andy just before the show. Tell us about George Naismith. George was the pro who, adjusting to clubs, you turned pro as a left-hander.
I learned so many things from that man. I learned how to polish shoes. I learned how to polish the floor. I learned how to buff clubs. I learned how to build clubs. But the true story is I was leaving the driveway at Riversdale Golf Club one year, and I think I'd only been there for a year, and I was hitting a few balls nearly in the dark on the practice fairway, which ran parallel to the road. And I was playing left-handed, and he stopped the car, and he came out, and he said, "Watch me." He said, "Let me watch you hit a couple of balls." So I hit like 3 or 4 balls left-handed down the fairway about 200 yards and everything. And he said, "I didn't know you played left-handed." He said, "I don't think you're going to be a very good player playing left-handed." He said, "I don't ever want to see you swing left-handed again." He said, "Starting tomorrow, you get yourself a set of right-handed clubs, and I want you to start playing right-handed." And I looked at him, and I just simply said, "Yes, sir."
So
And then fast forward about 6 months, and I'm out on the lower part of the putting green at Riversdale hitting a few putts, and I really hadn't adjusted to putting right-handed, and so I was practicing left-handed. And he said, walked out from the pro shop, walked across the green. He said, "What do you think you're doing?" I said, "Well, I'm practicing my putting." He said, "You don't want people to think you look stupid if you play right-handed and putt left-handed." He said, "People are going to laugh at you." So he said, "I want you to start putting right-handed." I looked at him, "Yes, sir."
So
true story.
Wow.
So, David,
Yeah.
do you think he was right about that left-handed assessment of your game? Do you think you could have made it as a left-hander?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I was. I wasn't that strong a guy. I wasn't very heavy. I wasn't big and strong. His belief, and I still believe it today, his belief was that the stronger of the two hands should be on the bottom of the grip. So when the club comes down on the downswing, it's open to the target, and it requires the stronger of the two hands to get the club head back to square at impact. And that was his philosophy, and I think even today, with a few exceptions, and there are always some exceptions, but I think today the strong hand should still be on the bottom of the club.
So what made him think you were right-handed, though? Like, you've obviously been good enough to turn pro as a left-hander.
No, he simply asked me, he said, "Do you throw left-handed?" I said, "No, I throw right-handed." He said, "Do you write right-handed?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, then your dominant side is right-handed, and I think it should be on the bottom part of your grip." And I was young, and I was tutored well and given good advice, and it wasn't my position to dispute it. So I just said simply, "Yes, sir, I believe what you're telling me." And I think it was very strong advice for a 15-year-old kid.
So someone else who gave you great advice was one of the most loved Australian golfers ever, Bruce Devlin.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Bruce Devlin really had a huge impact on my game because I had learned to play mainly under Alex Mercer's tutelage, but I had learned to play with the small ball. I stood a long way from the ball with my address position. I played with flat clubs, and I was what they would call today a slinger of the ball. I hit slinging right to lefts all the time to get power. And I played at Colonial in like 1972, and I missed the cut, and I went to Bruce, and I said, "Bruce, I'm really struggling. I can't stop the ball." He said, "Do you want me to give you the whole story?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I do. I want to be a better player." He said, "Well, you've got to learn to hit the ball higher, and the only way you can do that is to get closer to the ball and get your swing more upright." And I was also fortunate that I lived very close to Jack Nicklaus, and I would go up there and periodically practice with him at his club, and then I would play a lot of practice rounds with him at Augusta. And the more I watched him, the more I got to getting closer to the ball and getting a higher ball flight. But Bruce was the person that started that whole ball rolling, because you can't play golf with tucked pins and firm greens if you can't control the trajectory of the ball. So being a low slinging hook player to going to hitting high straight balls was a huge difference relevant to the swing plane.
So how long did that take you?
Oh, yeah.
Before you felt like you were one of the best players on the tour by the mid to late 70s, probably.
I won my first tournament in 1972 in America, so I I obviously adjusted pretty good because I had people that had been there and had done it and were successful, and it wasn't for me to really dispute that. You know, I thought, well, they know a lot more than I do, and they're not there to hurt me. They're here to help. So it was just to my benefit to pay attention and listen and try and apply it.
So you failed to mention who you beat in a playoff for that tournament.
I beat Bruce,
yeah. You must have had your work ethic to make this happen, David, to go from left to right and then to change, you know, kind of like your whole swing again once you've had that conversation with Bruce Devlin. Was that one of your great strengths, just your ability to get on the range and make the thing work?
Well, I don't think for any player, I don't think the game comes easily. Players make it look easy, but it's because they work the hardest. And I don't think anybody is just out of the womb destined to be a good player. I think it's a work in progress like tennis is. You go one step at a time, and golf's the same, and you learn at one level and then you go to the next level. And I always believed that the harder, I believed in the Gary Player philosophy, that the harder you worked, the more successful you would be. And I didn't have a good relationship with my dad because he drank so much. So I just didn't have any desire to go to bars and party and drink. I would much prefer to go to the practice fairway. So it was a good thing for me. I think that's what was my driving force, is that I wanted to make something out of my life, and golf was it.
Well, there's something really profoundly important in there for any young player who might be listening to this. Can I just go right back to where we started, back to 77 at the Australian Golf Club, David? We've got this series where we're celebrating Australian Open wins. What were the conditions? Can you remember what the conditions were like in the third round that year? There were only 2 sub-70 rounds shot that day. One of them belonged to you, and I think Bob Shearer might have been the other. They were the only sub-70 rounds. And some of the great players in the field were shooting 80-pluses. Like Nicholas shot 80, Billy Dunk shot 80, Greg Norman shot 85. Can you remember what it was like that day?
What did I shoot?
68.
Oh, my gosh. I didn't realize I played that well. Well, I may have been blessed with a better tee time, too. I doubt that Nicholas would have been that far away from where I was playing, so the conditions might have been the same. So I may have just got very fortunate to have handled the conditions and be able to finish. I do remember the biggest memory I have is my tee shot at 17, because there was Jack had put a lake out there on the left side which was reachable, and I think I was playing with Don January. He hit it to the right in the trees, and he made 5 and I made 4, and then I hit my third shot on the green. But yeah, I don't remember that much about it. I've never really spent much time thinking about all of the rounds that I've played. I remember certain shots, but I don't remember the rounds in their entirety. Very few people have the ability to do that, and I'm not one of them.
It was Jack Newton, by the way, shot the other sub-70 round that day.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of arguably not arguably one of the great rounds, one of the great rounds was at Meriden in 1981, where you've said you don't remember even much of that round.
Well, I remember maybe more of that round than most, only because it was a U.S. Open and it was on a Sunday and it was a little bit deeper into my career. And it got so much publicity because of the greens in regulation and the methodicalness of that. I remember not all of it. I remember number one. I remember 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. A few of the holes in between I don't remember, but that was a good day.
So how would you compare that round to the one at Oakland Hills, which, aside from the last hole...
Yeah. You had to bring that up, didn't you?
Well, while it was par for 63, I mean that was going to be the lowest score ever in a major. It was even with the double bogey, it was still one of the great rounds ever played in major championship golf.
Well, and that was on a course that Hogan had labelled the Monster.
Yeah.
Because of its new design by Robert Trent Jones. And, if that had been a 17-hole tournament, that would have been maybe the best. I think the best golf that I ever played was when I won the American Golf Classic at Firestone. I played the first 2 days with Mr. Palmer. I bogeyed the very first hole, and then I played 66 holes without making a bogey. And that was a hard golf course for guys playing old golf balls and wooden clubs and everything. That was really difficult. I think that, and I only won by 4. So I think that was some of the best 4-round golf that I'd ever played.
You win your 2 majors. Included in those, David, are 16 top 10 finishes in major championships, which is a really great record, and goes to why you're rightfully eventually inducted into the World Golf Hall of Fame. How proud of your ability to produce really good golf, something close to your best golf, in major championships? How proud of that fact are you?
Well, I think a lot of that credit goes to guys like Gary Player, guys like Jack Nicklaus that wanted to win majors, and the preparation towards winning majors was different than playing in regular tournaments. And I think it's that way even today for the younger players. But I'm amazed at how, if you look at the Nicklaus era when he won 18 majors. But if you look at the players, excuse me, like Gary Player, I think won 9 majors against Nicklaus in his career. Tom Watson won 8. Lee Trevino won 6. Raymond Floyd won 5. So Nick Faldo won, I think, 6. There were a multitude of multiple major winners when Nicklaus was at his absolute peak in that 20-year period. And you don't see that today in golf. I mean, you look at McIlroy, he came out blistering and won 4 majors out of the blue, and then in the last 2 or 3 years hasn't come close. And I should interject and change a little bit, and I think Australian golf is blessed that they have like a Jordan Spieth that wants to come to Australia and considers that a very important tournament for him to win, and we're lucky that he's won, and we're lucky that he wants to come back and play again, because he's really keeping that tournament alive and sponsor happy because of his ability to come down there. So I take my hat off to him for doing that.
So, David, you obviously spent most of your professional career in the States and live there now. I saw it firsthand when you came back a couple of years ago for the 100th birthday celebrations, but you've been a super proud Australian for a very long time, played in Dunhill Cups and do your best to represent Australia whenever possible. What does that national championship mean to you among all the things you've won?
Oh, I think it's right up there. I mean, to win any national championship is a great thrill. And for me to have won at that particular time on that particular golf course with that quality of field, I could have, should have, maybe won more of them because I kept coming to Australia at the peak of my career. I don't know why I didn't play it or win more, but that particular one was very significant in my career. It obviously gave me a boost to, stay in America and keep playing competitively. There's no question about that. But, I kind of got my start when I won the Tasmanian Open and I won the Victorian Open, and Frank Phillips beat me in a playoff for me to win 3 in a row. That's kind of where I got started, and I was really lucky that Eric Kremen came to Tasmania when I lived down there, and I played a 9-hole exhibition with him. And he said, "You've got to get out of here." He said, "I'm going to get you a job in Sydney. I'm going to find you a place to live." And about 2 weeks later, he called me up and said, "Pack your bags, come up here. I've got you a job working for PGF for Claire Igson." So there were periods in my life that were very significant to my success.
So another significant tournament, David, was Australian Open, was the 1972, the famous playoff with Peter Thompson, and what a great shot he hit to the last hole, and what a great tournament that was. I remember watching as a kid. I thought it was, it was in my eyes, to a 15, 14-year-old kid, it was a huge event then.
Yeah, it was, and I made an error. I mentally and did not do a very good job. I was upset at the fact that the official did not toss a coin on the first tee to see who had the honor, and Peter walked up and hit first, and I kind of stood there and said, "Wait a minute, why? Where's the ball tosser? Where's the number out of the hat?" I got ticked off, and I hit it out of bounds, and the rest was really history. So, but I spent a little bit of time, talking about that. But a couple of years ago, when I was in Sydney, Mr. Thompson and Mary, my wife, and I went out, had a lovely dinner, and it was great. I'm sorry to hear that he's not in good health.
David, it's been a joy speaking to you. You are a living golfing treasure in this country over here, and I hope you get a sense for that when you speak to people who love the game, like the three of us here and others, that anytime we get to hear you reflect on what you've done, it's a great opportunity for us. And
I'm excited. I'm excited that the President's Cup is going to come back to Royal Melbourne in 2 years, and I'm on the board of that tournament, and I very kindly get invited. I'm on my way to New York this week for the President's Cup, and hopefully, if I'm still making a few putts, I'll come to Royal Melbourne in a couple of years. So that'll be another time for me to go down memory lane.
Well, you can catch up with the other Australian US Open champion this week at the next week at the President's Cup. You will both be there, which will be nice.
Yes.
Here's the vice captain, so it would be great if you could come down for Royal Melbourne. It would be fantastic to see you here again.
Yeah, I will look forward to that happening. I'm sure it's
great.
David, thanks for spending some time with us on our little podcast over here in Australia. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Okay, have a good day.
Thanks, David.
David Graham joining us here on Inside the Ropes.
Hi, this is Sherelle McMahon. Swing Fit is the fun, healthy, social way for women to get started in golf. You'll learn the basics of the golf swing and how to putt over a 6-week program, and get your whole body moving through yoga and Pilates-style exercises. You don't need any golf knowledge or equipment. Simply turn up in comfy clothing and get started. You'll be surrounded by like-minded people and receive constant support. So get outdoors, meet new friends, and learn a sport that you can play for the rest of your life. To find a program near you, visit swingfit.com.au.
Hi, it's Stuart Appleby here. With October coming up, it's time to share the golf bug with a friend.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed that as much as we did. And as we said, we could have spent a whole lot longer talking to him. I mean, we probably need to spend more time talking to David.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one of the things about David Graham, we didn't really touch on it, was he's the only Australian male to win 2 separate major championships. So Shark's won a couple of Opens. Peter Thompson's won a couple of Opens. No one else has got the number 2 up yet. He's won the PGA and the US Open, which we did touch on. His story is extraordinary, as we heard, but he's basically, not in a mental sense, he didn't walk away, but he's been removed from Australia for so long, and having spoken to him a little bit before the 100th Australian Open that he referred to, he fears that people don't know who he is and that he's still Australian at heart. He always represents Australia when he gets a chance to tee it up somewhere. I think we'd do a disservice to Australian golf fans if we didn't get him back on at some point, because he's got a huge story that he's desperate to tell, because it's been lost to a generation.
I think we should make a beeline for him when he's going to be out here, obviously on a couple of occasions in the next couple of years.
Yes.
So we should make sure that we get him in here one day and really sit down and get all the things, even if it goes for 2.5 hours, I think just sit down and get all the things that he's got to say recorded, I reckon.
Well, I put it to the listeners as well that if there's stories that you want to hear and people that you think we should get on, be proactive in talking to us about it, because there's so many people that have contributed to the game that, and we haven't done a great job of it necessarily in Australia in acknowledging that, and this is a great forum to do it.
No doubt, it is. Before we tidy up with